Germanic invasions and collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The Romans fought the barbarians at the borders of the Roman Empire for many years. In some cases, barbarians became part of the Roman Empire. In other cases, they fought wars and, eventually, sacked the city of Rome, bringing about the end of the Western Roman Empire. The city being sacked first by Alaric in August 410 and even by General Ricimer's unpaid Roman troops, largely composed of barbarians, in July 472. This was the first time in almost 800 years that Rome had fallen to an enemy. The previous sack of Rome had been accomplished by the Gauls under their leader Brennus in 387 BCE. The sacking of 410 CE is seen as a major landmark in the decline and fall of the Western Roman Empire. St. Jerome, living in Bethlehem at the time, wrote that the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. These sackings of the city astonished the entire Roman world. In any case, the damage caused by the sackings may have been overestimated. The population already started to decline from the late 4th century onward, although around the middle of the 5th century it seems that Rome continued to be the most populous city of the two parts of the empire, with a population of not less than 650,000 inhabitants. The decline greatly accelerated following the capture of Africa by the Vandals. Many inhabitants now fled as the city no longer could be supplied with grain from Africa from the mid-5th century onward. At the beginning of the 6th century Rome's population may have been less than 100,000. Many monuments were being destroyed by the citizens themselves, who stripped stones from closed temples and other precious buildings, and even burned statues to make lime for their personal use. In addition, most of the increasing numbers of churches were built in this way. For example, the first St. Peter's Basilica was erected using spoils from the abandoned circus of Nero. This architectural cannibalism was a constant feature of Roman life until the Renaissance. From the 4th century, imperial edicts against stripping of stones and especially marble were common, but the need for their repetition shows that they were ineffective. Sometimes new churches were created by simply taking advantage of early pagan temples, while sometimes changing the pagan god or hero to a corresponding Christian saint or martyr. In this way, the temple of Romulus and Remus became the basilica of the twin saints Cosmas and Damian. Later, the Pantheon, temple of all gods, became the church of all martyrs. Barbarian and Byzantine rule. In 480, the last Western Roman emperor, Julius Nepos, was murdered and a Roman general of barbarian origin, Odoacer, declared allegiance to Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno. Despite owing nominal allegiance to Constantinople, Odoacer and later the Ostrogoths continued, like the last emperors, to rule Italy as a virtually independent realm from Ravenna. Meanwhile, the Senate, even though long since stripped of wider powers, continued to administer Rome itself, with the Pope usually coming from a senatorial family. This situation continued until Theodore had murdered Amalasuntha, a pro-imperial Gothic queen, and usurped the power in 535. The Eastern Roman Emperor, Justinian I, reigned 527–565, used this as a pretext to send forces to Italy under his famed general Belisarius, recapturing the city next year. The Byzantines successfully defended the city in a year-long siege, and eventually took Ravenna. Gothic resistance revived however, and on 17th of December, 546, the Ostrogoths under Totila recaptured and sacked Rome. Belisarius soon recovered the city, but the Ostrogoths retook it in 549. Belisarius was replaced by Narses, who captured Rome from the Ostrogoths for good in 552, ending the so-called Gothic Wars which had devastated much of Italy. The continual war around Rome in the 530s and 540s left it in a state of total disrepair, near abandoned and desolate, with much of its lower-lying parts turned into unhealthy marshes as the drainage systems were neglected and the Tiber's embankments fell into disrepair in the course of the latter half of the 6th century. Here, malaria developed. The aqueducts were not repaired. The population, without imports of grain and oil from Sicily, shrank to less than 50,000, concentrated near the Tiber and around the Campus Martius, abandoning those districts without water supply. Justinian I provided grants for the maintenance of public buildings, aqueducts and bridges, though these were not always sufficient. He also styled himself the patron of its remaining scholars, orators, physicians and lawyers, in the stated hope that eventually more youths would seek a better education. After the wars, the Senate was theoretically restored, but under the supervision of the urban prefect and other officials appointed by, and responsible to, the Byzantine authorities in Ravenna. However, the Pope was now one of the leading religious figures in the entire Byzantine Empire and effectively more powerful locally than either the remaining senators or local Byzantine officials. In practice, local power in Rome devolved to the Pope and, over the next few decades, both much of the remaining possessions of the senatorial aristocracy and the local Byzantine administration in Rome were absorbed by the Church. The reign of Justinian's nephew and successor Justin II, reigned 565–578, was marked from the Italian point of view by the invasion of the Lombards under Alboin, 568. In capturing the regions of Benevento, Lombardy, Piedmont, Spolto, and Tuscany, the invaders effectively restricted imperial authority to small islands of land surrounding a number of coastal cities, including Ravenna, Naples, Rome and the area of the future Venice. The one inland city continuing under Byzantine control was Perugia, which provided a repeatedly threatened overland link between Rome and Ravenna. In 578 and again in 580, the Senate, in some of its last recorded acts, had to ask for the support of Tiberius II Constantine, reigned 578–582, against the approaching dukes, Feroald of Spolto and Zotto of Benevento. Maurice, reigned 582–602, added a new factor in the continuing conflict by creating an alliance with Childebert II of Austrasia, reigned 575–595. The armies of the Frankish king invaded the Lombard territories in 584, and 590. Rome had suffered badly from a disastrous flood of the Tiber in 589. Followed by a plague in 590. The latter is notable for the legend of the angel seen, while the newly elected Pope Gregory I, term 590–604, was passing in procession by Hadrian's tomb, to hover over the building and to sheathe his flaming sword as a sign that the pestilence was about to cease. Agilulf, however, the new Lombard king, reigned 591–616, managed to secure peace with Childebert, reorganized his territories and resumed activities against both Naples and Rome by 592. With the emperor preoccupied with wars in the eastern borders and the various succeeding exarchs unable to secure Rome from invasion, Gregory took personal initiative in starting negotiations for a peace treaty. The position of the Bishop of Rome was further strengthened under the usurper Phocas, reigned 602–610. Vicars recognized his primacy over that of the Patriarch of Constantinople and even decreed Pope Boniface III to be the head of all the churches. Vicars' reign saw the erection of the last imperial monument in the Roman Forum, the column bearing his name. He also gave the Pope the Pantheon, at the time closed for centuries, and thus probably saved it from destruction. During the 7th century, an influx of both Byzantine officials and churchmen from elsewhere in the empire made both the local aristocracy and church leadership largely Greek-speaking. The population of Rome, a magnet for pilgrims, may have increased to 90,000. 11 of 13 popes between 678 and 752 were of Greek or Syrian descent. However, the strong Byzantine cultural influence did not always lead to political harmony between Rome and Constantinople. In the controversy over monothelitism, popes found themselves under severe pressure, sometimes amounting to physical force, when they failed to keep in step with Constantinople's shifting theological positions. In 653, Pope Martin I was deported to Constantinople and, after a short trial, exiled to the Crimea, where he died. Then, in 663, Rome had its first imperial visit for 2 centuries, by Constans, its worst disaster since the Gothic Wars, when the emperor proceeded to strip Rome of metal, including that from buildings and statues, to provide armament materials for use against the Saracens. However, for the next half-century, despite further tensions, Rome and the papacy continued to prefer continued Byzantine rule, in part because the alternative was Lombard rule, and in part because Rome's food was largely coming from papal estates elsewhere in the empire, particularly Sicily. In 727, Pope Gregory II refused to accept the decrees of Emperor Leo III, which promoted the emperor's iconoclasm. Leo reacted first by trying in vain to abduct the pontiff, and then by sending a force of Ravenite troops under the command of the Exarch Paulus, but they were pushed back by the Lombards of Tassa and Benevento. Roman General Eutychius, sent west by the emperor, successfully captured Rome and restored it as a part of the empire in 728. In November, 731, a council was called in St. Peter's by Gregory III to excommunicate the iconoclasts. The emperor responded by confiscating large papal estates in Sicily and Calabria and transferring areas previously ecclesiastically under the Pope to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Despite the tensions, Gregory III never discontinued his support to the imperial efforts against external threats. In this period the Lombard kingdom revived under the leadership of King Luttprand. In 730 he razed the countryside of Rome to punish the Pope who had supported the Duke of Spolto. Though still protected by his massive walls, the Pope could do little against the Lombard king, who managed to ally himself with the Byzantines. Other protectors were now needed. Gregory III was the first pope to ask for concrete help from the Frankish kingdom, then under the command of Charles Martel, 739. Luttprand's successor Aistulf was even more aggressive. He conquered Ferrara and Ravenna, ending the Exarchate of Ravenna. Rome seemed his next victim. In 754, Pope Stephen II went to France to name Pippin the Younger, King of the Franks, as Patricius Romanorum, that is, protector of Rome. In the August of that year the king and pope together crossed back the Alps and defeated Aistulf at Pavia. When Pippin went back to St. Denis, however, Aistulf did not keep his promises, and in 756 besieged Rome for 56 days. The Lombards returned north when they heard news of Pippin again moving to Italy. This time he agreed to give the Pope the promised territories, and the Papal States were born. In 771 the new king of the Lombards, Desiderius, devised a plot to conquer Rome and seize Pope Stephen III during a vain pilgrimage within its walls. His main ally was one Paulus Affiata, chief of the Lombard party within the city. He conquered Rome in 772 but angered Charlemagne. However, the plan failed, and Stephen's successor, Pope Hadrian I, called Charlemagne against Desiderius, who was finally defeated in 773. The Lombard kingdom was no more, and now Rome entered into the orbit of a new, greater political institution. Formation of the Holy Roman Empire. On 25th of April, 799 the new Pope, Leo III, led the traditional procession from the Lateran to the Church of San Lorenzo in Lucina along the Via Flaminia. Two nobles, followers of his predecessor Hadrian, who disliked the weakness of the Pope with regards to Charlemagne, attacked the processional train and delivered a life-threatening wound to the Pope. Leo fled to the king of the Franks, and in November, 800, the king entered Rome with a strong army and a number of French bishops. He declared a judicial trial to decide if Leo III were to remain pope, or if the deposer's claims had reasons to be upheld. This trial, however, was only a part of a well-thought-out chain of events which ultimately surprised the world. The pope was declared legitimate and the attempters subsequently exiled. On 25th of December, 800, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Holy Roman Emperor in St. Peter's Basilica. This act forever severed the loyalty of Rome from its imperial progeny, Constantinople. It created instead a rival empire which, after a long series of conquests by Charlemagne, now encompassed most of the Christian Western territories. Following the death of Charlemagne, the lack of a figure with equal prestige led the new institution into disagreement. At the same time, the Universal Church of Rome had to face emergence of the lay interests of the city itself, spurred on by the conviction that the Roman people, though impoverished and abased, had again the right to elect the Western Emperor. The famous counterfeit document called the Donation of Constantine, prepared by the papal notaries, guaranteed to the Pope a dominion stretching from Ravenna to Gaeta. This nominally included the suzerainty over Rome, but this was often highly disputed, and as the centuries passed, only the strongest popes were to be able to assert it. The main element of weakness of the papacy within the walls of the city was the continued necessity of the election of new popes, in which the emerging noble families soon managed to insert a leading role for themselves. The neighboring powers, namely the Duchy of Spolto and Toscana, and later the emperors, learned how to take their own advantage of this internal weakness, playing the role of arbiters among the contestants. Rome was indeed prey of anarchy in this age. The lowest point was touched in 897, when a raging crowd exhumed the corpse of a dead pope, Formosus, and put it on trial. Roman Commune. From 1048 to 1257, the papacy experienced increasing conflict with the leaders and churches of the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. The latter culminated in the East-West Schism, dividing the Catholic Church into Eastern Orthodox Church. From 1257 to 1377, the Pope, though the Bishop of Rome, resided in Viterbo, Orvieto, and Perugia, and then Avignon. The return of the popes to Rome after the Avignon papacy was followed by the Western Schism, the division of the Western Church between two, and for a time three, competing papal claimants. In this period the renovated church was again attracting pilgrims and prelates from all the Christian world, and money with them, Even with a population of only 30,000, Rome was again becoming a city of consumers dependent upon the presence of a governmental bureaucracy. In the meantime, Italian cities were acquiring increasing autonomy, mainly led by new families which were replacing the old aristocracy with a new class formed by entrepreneurs, traders and merchants. After the sack of Rome by the Normans in 1084, the rebuilding of the city was supported by powerful families such as the Frangipane family and the Pierini family, whose wealth came from commerce and banking rather than landholdings. Inspired by neighboring cities like Tivoli and Viterbo, Rome's people began to consider adopting a communal status and gaining a substantial amount of freedom from papal authority. Led by Giordano Pierini, the Romans rebelled against the aristocracy and church rule in 1143. The Senate and the Roman Republic, the Commune of Rome, were born again. Through the inflammatory words of preacher Arnaldo da Brescia, an idealistic, fierce opponent of ecclesiastical property and church interference in temporal affairs, the revolt that led to the creation of the Commune of Rome continued until it was put down in 1155, though it left its mark on the civil government of the Eternal City for centuries. 12th century Rome, however, had little in common with the empire which had ruled over the Mediterranean some 700 years before, and soon the new Senate had to work hard to survive, choosing an ambiguous policy of shifting its support from the Pope to the Holy Roman Empire and vice versa as the political situation required. At Monteporzio, in 1167, during one of these shifts, in the war with Tusculum, Roman troops were defeated by the imperial forces of Frederick Barbarossa. Luckily, the winning enemies were soon dispersed by a plague and Rome was saved. In 1188, the new communal government was finally recognized by Pope Clement III. The Pope had to make large cash payments to the communal officials, while the 56 senators became papal vassals. The Senate always had problems in the accomplishment of its function, and various changes were tried. Often a single senator was in charge. This sometimes led to tyrannies, which did not help the stability of the newborn organism. In 1204 the streets of Rome were again in flames when the struggle between Pope Innocent III's family and its rivals, the powerful Orsini family, led to riots in the city. Many ancient buildings were then destroyed by machines used by the rival bands to besiege their enemies, and the innumerable towers and strongholds which were a hallmark of the Middle Age Italian towns. The struggle between the popes and the Emperor Frederick II, also King of Naples and Sicily, saw Rome support the Ghibellines. To repay his loyalty, Frederick sent to the Commune the Carroccio he had won to the Lombards at the Battle of Cortenuova in 1234, and which was exposed in the Campidoglio. In that year, during another revolt against the Pope, the Romans headed by Senator Luca Savli sacked the Lateran. Curiously, Savli was the nephew of Pope Honorius III and father of Honorius IV, but in that age family ties often did not determine one's allegiance. Rome was never to evolve into an autonomous, stable reign, as happened to other communes like Florence, Siena or Milan. In an attempt to imitate more successful communes, in 1252 the people elected a foreign senator, the Bolognese Brancaleone Gliandolo. In order to bring peace in the city he suppressed the most powerful nobles, reorganized the working classes and issued a code of laws inspired by those of northern Italy. After June 1265 Rome was again a democratic republic, electing Henry of Castile as senator. But Conradin and the Ghibelline party were crushed in the Battle of Tagliacozzo, 1268, and therefore Rome fell again in the hands of Charles. Nicholas III, a member of Orsini family, was elected in 1277 and moved the seat of the popes from the Lateran to the more defensible Vatican. He also ordered that no foreigner could become senator of Rome. Being a Roman himself, he had himself elected senator by the people. Boniface VIII and the Babylonian captivity. The successor to Celestine V was a Roman of the Kitani family, Boniface VIII. Entangled in a local feud against the traditional rivals of his family, the Colonna, at the same time he struggled to assure universal supremacy of the Holy See. In 1300 he launched the first Jubilee and in 1303 founded the first University of Rome. The Jubilee was an important move for Rome, as it further increased its international prestige and, most of all, the city's economy was boosted by the flow of pilgrims. Boniface's successor, Clement V, never entered the city, starting the so-called Babylonian captivity, the absence of the popes from their Roman seat in favor of Avignon, which would last for more than 70 years. This situation brought the independence of the local powers, but these were revealed to be largely unstable, and the lack of the holy revenues caused a deep decay of Rome. For more than a century Rome had no new major buildings. Furthermore, many of the monuments of the city, including the main churches, began to fall into ruin.